So, shall we start now? I think all of you are back here. Okay, right. So, as you know, that we have two papers or two titles on which you need to write something. The one which is for the mid semester is titled as simply the comparison or contrast and comparison between rationalism and empiricism. And second, which is the final term paper, is from Indian epistemology, where you have to write about the six means of knowing. And today or in the next few sessions also, maybe two more sessions in excluding this one, we will talk about a little bit about rationalism and empiricism. And the syllabus in our syllabus, if you see it, we had last time in the last semester also we delved deep into different philosophers who come under rationalism and empiricism. But this time, what I want to do is just to give you an overview of these methods or methodologies of rationalism and empiricism. So we will not delve deep into the philosophers themselves. So in rationalism, you have three, four philosophers, and empiricism also you have some philosophers. So we are not going deep into that because of this paucity of time and commitment also. So what my aim is there, that I just think that I just provide you some overview and background of rationalism and empiricism so that you can write your paper in a beautiful way. Okay, so that's my purpose. And today I'll just share with you some of the insights. What does it mean? What you have to write? And simply I will give you a brief overview of these two concepts. And those who have attended my sessions in the university, they all can relate to this because many things will be connected also to those things which we had done in the university. Okay, okay. So before we talk about it, I just want to recapitulate quite very briefly what we had done in our classes in the university. Okay, so that will help us in figuring out rationalism and empiricism. Okay, and before that, let me tell you one more thing, that the theories which we are talking about and the period with which we are concerned is maybe yeah, it's 17th or 16th century, the second half of the 16th century and first half of the or the entire 17th century. So it's something in the modern period, not modern in the sense of that 20th century or 21st century, but modern in the sense that when we have the advent of this Renaissance period or the end of medieval era. So in that sense, so we are directly jumping from Greek philosophy to modernity or simply to 16th century. So there's a huge gap between these two things. And the point is that things are, or the ideas are interconnected. So we have to cover the philosophy of medieval era also, maybe very shortly or in very brief session. So I will give you how the historical context was there when rationalism and empiricism developed, and I will try to trace also the movement from antiquity to this modernity. And we'll very briefly do something about this medieval philosophy also. Okay. So if you remember, we had talked about this concept of sympathetic imagination in the classroom, that whatever philosopher we want to discuss, or whatever idea or theory we want to discuss, we have to go into that time and space. At least we can try. So we have to imagine things from that particular philosopher's perspective. So what were the conditions before him? Because things are dramatically different in 21st century. So that we did successfully in case of Greek philosophy or Greek epistemology. And now the same thing or some sort of similar exercise we'll do in case of this modern philosophy also. So history or the knowledge of historical context is very important when we are concerned in studying any philosophy. Okay. So I don't know about the other disciplines, but as far as philosophy is concerned, knowledge of historical events, and not specifically events, but also of the journey of ideas, this is something indispensable when you want to study philosophy. So philosophy and history go hand in hand. Okay, they go hand in hand. And history not as simply as the chronology of events, but the flow of ideas. Or simply you can say philosophy is the history of ideas of human beings. So in that sense, we have to connect the change, we have to look into the background, and then we can understand very quite easily any philosophy or any philosopher. So once again, we'll indulge into sympathetic imagination like we did in the Greek context. Now the context is 16th century and the period of Renaissance or post-Renaissance. I hope that's clear. Okay, so let us quickly revise what we did in our classrooms. So we talked about epistemology as the science or the study of knowledge itself. And we saw that the Greek mind wanted to know about the permanent entities amid the crisis or amid the flux of nature. So amid changing things, knowledge was to find the knowledge of the permanent entities. And those permanent entities we termed as arche, okay, or the immutable and permanent things. And in the beginning, before the birth of philosophy, in the times of Homer and Hesiod and all those people, the arche was explained in the terms of mythology. Okay, those Greek, ancient Greek gods and goddesses, all the pantheon. And then there was a break from this, or a shift from mythological explanation to rational explanation or inquiry by the early philosophers. And if you remember, we talked about people like Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, Pythagoras also we talked about. Okay, so they tried to explain the arche of the universe in a rational way. Okay, not resorting to myths or theories or stories, all those things. And then eventually we came to the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle. And in Plato, we talked about his theory of ideas. So how he transformed those notion of arche into philosophical concepts or ideas or forms which are also in the mind and also in some another realm. Okay, so in Plato we come across for the first time duality of word, or two different words. One is the word of ideas I hope you remember this distinction. So the world of ideas, the higher realm, and the world of objects, the lower realm. And the knowledge specifically was about these ideas rather than these objects which were temporary. So just to recall these ideas, so we delve deep and about these philosophies and these concepts, and to know these ideas, Plato chiefly suggested that the main source was reason. Okay, so objects could be, or the sensory objects could be known by experience through senses, and the ideas or concepts were known or intuited with the help of reason or rational faculty. So that is what we did there. And we did very briefly about Aristotle also. And we could not do much in Aristotle, but just two or three points are worth remembering. That Aristotle negated this duality of the world of ideas and the world of objects. So what his notion was that ideas exist, okay, those immutable permanent ideas exist, but they do not exist beyond the world, they are within the world. Okay, so he just eliminated this boundary between ideas and objects. Okay, so he becomes more world centric. And for Aristotle, knowledge is not simply you go in isolation and think about your mental powers and intuit things in a rational way. It comes by observation. For Aristotle, it comes from the observation of concrete things. For Aristotle, so for him ideas are within this world and nowhere else. So that was one major important contribution developed by Aristotle over the philosophy of Plato. And second was that he proposed some kind of teleological explanation of the universe. Okay, all the objects are there in the world and they have some kind of functions or purposes hidden in themselves. And the job of a philosopher or anybody who seeks knowledge is to know the purpose of any particular thing. Okay, so that we had done. Now if you see carefully and if you have a bird's eye view of these philosophers, then you can see that there are roots of rationalism and empiricism. So Plato, you can say, was a rationalist. Okay, Plato was a rationalist because he proposed that reason is the chief source of knowledge. And Aristotle, he uses reason or he admires the rational faculties, but he is more inclined towards experience, okay, or the knowledge from experience. And if you can recall, Aristotle is the father of many well-known empirical disciplines such as biology, even psychology also. So he used to experiment with animals, all those things. So what are things which are there in the animate world? Okay, not just the world of reason. So in Aristotle, we find the roots of empiricism, and in Plato, we find the roots of rationalism. So this point has to be kept in mind. And then we'll see that in Renaissance, there was a revival of this classical thought and the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle. And there also we'll see that there will be a rise of rationalism vis-a-vis empiricism, and they owe to some extent their formulations to the theories of Plato and Aristotle. So that's the uh, simple suggestion which I want to make. Okay, so keep that in mind. And in fact, you can see this picture once again where Plato is pointing his finger up in the sky and Aristotle is pointing or is putting his hand somewhere towards the ground. So for Plato, we have to look above and look into the world of ideas which are there in mind only. And for Aristotle, things need to be experienced from the world, and then knowledge has to be deduced. Okay, so we should not take their philosophies uh, very lightly, because these people were intellectual giants. And in history or in philosophy, we simply say that these are the two kinds of attitudes which all the people have. So each person is either having a mind of Plato or of Aristotle. Okay, so you are either of Platonic attitude or of Aristotelian attitude. So roughly the kind of divisions that we have, the personality characteristics such as being introvert or extrovert, or being outturned or inward turned, so they correspond to Plato and Aristotle. So introvert will stem from rationalism. Okay, you are so much absorbed in your mind. And extrovert, you go about out and about in the society, and you talk with people, you are sociable. And that's the two kind of attitudes. And for Plato, you can say his emphasis was to tell you that know thyself. And for Aristotle, the dictum is know the universe. Okay, so these are some of the roots which we can trace to these two philosophers. And then we'll see how these rudimentary ideas and seeds develop over the period of history of philosophy. Okay, and as I told you that I have to directly now jump to 16th century. So from 5th century BC or 4th century BC to 16th century, roughly a period of 2000 years, which we are skipping. But we need to know few things, because if we skip all the things, then it would be difficult to understand things. So in a very, extremely synoptic way, I will cover, it's a daunting task, but I'll just give you few fundamental tenets of this medieval era or medieval philosophy, or how things develop. Okay, we are doing a quick romp through the history of philosophy, or simply the history what happened after this classical Greek period. So you have Plato. So simply understand this chronology of events and philosophers, and that might help you. Okay, so we had Plato and Aristotle, and then we had the rise and fall of Macedonian Empire under Alexander. Okay, and then we had the rise and fall of Roman Empire as well, and this also carried the philosophy of Aristotle and Plato. And then somehow, as you know, we had the advent of Christianity. Okay, and so around this 4th or 5th century BC, we had this advent, not BC but AD. We had this establishment of Christianity, and for a period of roughly 1000 years, the philosophy of Christianity dominated the Europe. So this is you all know probably about these basic chronology of events. So there's something which is called medieval synthesis. So in the period of that 1000 years, Christianity or Christian worldview dominated Europe or the Western world. So what we mean by medieval synthesis is that gradually whatever worldview was given by Christianity, it permeated through all the facets of human life. So right from birth, even before birth, a person's life was somehow engrossed and imbibed by Christianity, and up until birth, up until death. So from cradle to grave, life was Christianized. Okay, even after the grave, the influence or the theoretical idea of the influence of Christianity was seen there. So this is something which is known as medieval synthesis. That is to say that the Christianity or the Christian worldview permeated through all the facets of human life. So it took a long period of time. Okay, so more than 500 years or 900 years, and then ultimately when people were fed up, then there was the rise of Renaissance. So what was the uh, status of philosophy or the epistemology in particular? So there was this the Greek idea of classical, naturalism, okay, where one has to inquire or learn from nature, like Aristotle had prescribed. So this view was superseded by supernatural worldview of the church or the Christianity. Okay, so there was a break or complete oblivion from the classical thought. Okay, and another important thing or fundamental pillar was that the importance of faith, okay, or fido, it's called in Latin. So faith dominated the power of reason. Okay, so whatever knowledge was there, or the higher knowledge or the supreme knowledge, it could be revealed through faith only, and reason had a little importance in the life of human beings. And gradually, all the authority was given to church, and human or individual life was subjugated. Okay. Of course, there were some cultural and social developments also, but we are looking things from philosophical point of view and what has happened to the status of knowledge or epistemology. And as far as individuality was concerned, so there was not much individual progress made, or there was not much individual teleology or purpose to human life, except this that salvation became the crucial issue or the only crucial issue as far as individuality was concerned. So salvation, you might know that it was to acknowledge the divinity of prophet Jesus Christ, and to acknowledge how he sacrificed his life and purchased, in a sense, the redemption of human beings or the fallen human beings. So that sacrifice was to be acknowledged, and then the individual life or individual moral life was to be purified, and the human was asked to strive for individual salvation. So this was the status of knowledge and human teleology. Okay, so once again there is a concept which is called the terror of history in historical discipline. You might know about it. So what is this terror of history? So it says, uh, simply in short, that as history progresses, okay, as history moves, some of the great people from the history are forgotten. They are kept in oblivion. So see here what is happening. The classical philosophers like Aristotle or Plato or those great thoughts of those people, they are lost. So this is what is known by what we mean by terror of history, that it puts great people, once magnanimous and people who had grand influence, they also go into oblivion, or people forget about them as history progresses, as we move into the realm of future. Okay, so you see those people were forgotten. In fact, they were termed as pagan, or their philosophy as pagan philosophy, and which was not to be practiced by any ardent follower of Christianity. Okay, so that's the point. Now, another point is that so we talked about this terror of history, but there are some things, or somehow in history, the people whom we are saying that they are kept in oblivion, they somehow survive also. Okay, so somehow the ideas, the people, or the concepts, they bear and pass through this test of terror of history. So what I mean by that is that, let's take the example of Aristotle and Plato. So people forgot about them, but somehow people remembered also them, maybe in an indirect way. Okay, so that we'll see how that happened. And this happened under the garb of the philosophies of two Christian philosophers, Saint Augustine and Saint Thomas Aquinas. Okay, so they, all this Christianity had a polemic attitude towards classical thought, but these two philosophers, or Christian theologians more appropriately, they somehow fused the elements of the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle into Christianity. So that is an important phase in the development of ideas or the development of philosophies. So first big attempt was done by Saint Augustine, and the second was done by Thomas Aquinas. So Augustine published a book, his magnum opus, City of God. So he was somewhere in the 5th century. Okay, so in City of God, he describes two different worlds, quite similar to the dual words of Plato. Okay, so one word is the mortal existence, and then there is another word which is the city of God. So whatever Plato has envisioned as a theory or the world of ideas, so that was somehow, embellished under the flavor of Christianity. Okay, so there was world of sensible flux, and then on the other hand there was heavenly city, and towards which people had to strive. Okay, so Augustine is famously known as the, or Platonizer of Christianity, or in the philosophy of Augustine we see Platonization of Christianity. Okay, and then ultimately in somewhere in maybe 10th century, I'm not sure, we see the Aristotelianization. It's difficult to pronounce, but some kind of Aristotelification of Christianity, which was done by Thomas Aquinas. Okay, so Aristotle had developed some kind of logic also, some kind of syllogism also. So those methods were adopted by Thomas Aquinas, and whatever things were compatible with Christianity, Thomas Aquinas tried to imbibe them from Aristotle and also from Plato to some extent. So this compatible version of Christianity with Aristotle, or the views of Aristotle and Plato, is famously known as scholasticism. So scholasticism is the fusion of Christian belief with Greek philosophy and the views of Plato and Aristotle. So it was a kind of rational defense of Christianity with the help of logic, which was developed by Aristotle. So only so much so far is the development of Christianity, or Christianity fused together with Greek thought. And one thing was this natural theology, and the another was revealed theology. So what is natural theology? So it says that, so there are two kinds of theology. Natural theology will say that things which can be discussed in the universities or with the people, or things which are within the realm of reason. Okay, so discussion about God or religion falls into two categories. One category is natural theology, where reason will be applied and we will try to defend certain doctrines or dogmas of our religion. And then there are few things which reason cannot comprehend, and those things are left untouched, and the only way to know them or maybe to be with them is through the concept of faith. So that is called revealed theology. So revealed theology is beyond reason, and natural theology falls under the purview of rational investigation. So, and here, these saints or theologians employed the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle. Okay, so let me just summarize what was there. So status of knowledge, if you are somewhere at the end of the 12th or 13th century, what kind of worldview you have in terms of knowledge. So you can draw a kind of pyramid here. So the top or apex institution is the knowledge of church or Christianity. Then predominantly Aristotle or the views of Aristotle. Okay, and then to some extent Plato also. So this is a rising hierarchy. So these three sources or these three institutions, you can say, were the great sources of, or were the only sources of knowledge. Okay, and with the help of these people or these views, worldviews, there was a complete medieval synthesis. Now, what I mean by that? Okay, so knowledge, if you want to know knowledge, then you have three sources: Christianity, Aristotle, and Plato. And remember that Aristotle and Plato are subservient to Christianity. Whatever views they had, Aristotle or Plato, if that contradicts with the views of Christianity, then the view of Christianity will uphold. Okay, I hope that's clear. And after this, we had the, so you see a kind of, there is a kind of dogmatism here. Okay, so you cannot go beyond this circle of knowledge, and if you go and if you propose something or anything beyond Christianity, then you might be persecuted. Of course you will be persecuted if you say something against, or if you propose any theory which goes against Christianity or Aristotle or Plato. Okay, and more predominantly Christianity and Aristotle. So these two people or philosophies dominated the world or the Western world for more than 1,000 years. Okay, and of course when you have dogmatism, then you have restriction of liberalism and restriction of free flowing ideas, and knowledge or the development of ideas, it becomes some form of stagnation is there, it becomes obsolete, it becomes dogmatic, fanaticism is there, there is no much scientific and philosophical development. So this is the what we did, brief run through the worldview of Christianity or the medieval era, moving from, and we also saw how the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle survived the terror of history. And then maybe in the next session we'll see how how this idea or the wheel of idea takes another turn when we have this fall of Constantinople and the rise of Renaissance. And in Renaissance, once again we will have, okay, so Renaissance is a reaction against the medieval philosophy or medieval worldview. So in the reaction, it will give you so many different theories. We'll have many scientific development, we'll have many religious development, and we will have many philosophical development. And within those philosophical development, we have the philosophies of rationalism and empiricism. So I hope that's clear. So that was a very brief and very terse and synoptic overview of the background of what we are going to discuss. And I hope this helps you, and you can read whatever you want to read now. Maybe that might help you a little bit, but keep this background always in your mind and try to be in that scenario. Always remember this sympathetic imagination, its role in comprehending any philosophy. So maybe next time I'll just give you once again an overview of now directly the philosophers of rationalism and empiricism, what are their features, and then you can easily write or frame your papers. Okay, so with this I end. Maybe we'll have our next session after few more days. And so thank you all of you. And if you have any question, then you can drop the questions on our WhatsApp group also. And then next time we'll see when to hold our next class, maybe after a couple of days. Okay, so thank you all of you for being here and for your patience, and I'll see you next time. Okay, I unmute all of you. Thank you. I hope this was helpful.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so much,
sir.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
It was nice.